pleased to welcome back pro se advocate Brian Vukadinovich, and we're here for the Counterlawfare report. Brian, welcome back to the show. How you doing tonight?
Real good. Good to see you again, Jason.
Good to see you as well. We've got all of our sound nicely evened out. Everything sounds good. And Brian, of course, has become a regular on the show. Brian was put through the ringer when the local police in Valparaiso, Indiana, took a personal, basically they had a vendetta against you, Brian, and in the end it resulted in you becoming a little bit of a legal expert, of course, and you've written the book, Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case. People can purchase the book on Amazon.com. And how have the book sales been going, Brian? The book just came out in June, didn't it?
Yes, actually, from all accounts, I believe it's going very well. I haven't got any numbers yet from the publisher, but there are several factors that have taken place that have given me reason to believe that it's doing well. First of all, I'm getting a lot of great messages on Twitter and Facebook, and something that was very promising was the Barnes & Noble bookstore in Valparaiso, Indiana, ordered copies of the book and sold them all out. I don't know how many they had, but I do know that they sold them all out and ordered more, and then asked me to come and do a book signing there at the Valparaiso Barnes & Noble, which I'm going to be doing this Saturday on November 10th from 2 to 4. So all indications are that it's doing very good. I'm feeling good about it because I think my book is unique in the respect that I tell it like it is. It's all fact-based. There's nothing made up. There's no fiction in it. And I name names. I talk about judges, corrupt prosecutors. I name them by name. I disclose what happened, things that have taken place. And I have some items of evidence even showing in the book, some letters and documents and so forth. And also there's information in the book about corrupt activities by the FBI and the Department of Justice, which I also talk about in the book. And I also have some copies of information on there as well. For example, I was criticizing the Sheriff's Department in Porter County. There were some deaths. People were dying in the jail there in Porter County at the Sheriff's Department, and I wrote a guest editorial about it. And then the FBI saw my article and actually faxed it to the Department of Justice. So I put a copy of that in there, which makes me wonder about Big Brother watching. And it's disconcerting that a person would exercise his First Amendment right and criticize local government, and then the FBI would step in and have an issue with that. So it's all in the book. I mean, if people want to know what's really going on behind the scenes in the judiciary, in the Justice Department, the FBI, they should read my book, because I have things in there that I don't think has been written in any other books or any other publications before.
That's really amazing.
I've been a target, and so I think people need to know what's going on.
That's absolutely amazing, Brian. And the book, of course, Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case. People get it from Amazon.com. And of course, if you'd prefer to purchase it from a retailer that's not controlled by the CIA, you can go to BarnesandNoble.com. Or if you're in the Valparaiso area, get over to that Valparaiso Barnes & Noble. It's at 150 Shilhavy Road in Valparaiso, Indiana. And is it Saturday, Brian?
Yes, this coming Saturday on the 10th, November 10th from 2 to 4.
There we go. You can meet Brian. He'll sign the book. He can answer any questions you have. And Brian, you really are a champion of justice. I'm proud to know you and pleased we've been able to create this show together. People can also contact Brian on Twitter. He is at Motion, the number 4, Justice. And Brian is very active online. He's very helpful in answering questions. Let's help Brian get his Twitter following up there. There should be many, many more people following Brian. And he's joined me to create this rather unique program called the Counterlawfare Report. Now, our goal here, Brian, is to examine various cases that are in the public domain and examine aspects of the U.S. criminal and civil justice system that are either being abused or aren't right, or aren't adhering to the Constitution or their own laws. And today the topic we have decided to discuss is something that's been really a point of curiosity for me for some time, and that's the failure, or rather the lack of cameras in the courtroom. Now, court proceedings, if I'm not mistaken, Brian, are a matter of public domain, right? The public is allowed to sit in there. Why don't they let cameras?
Well, you're correct, Jason. It is a public domain, or at least it's supposed to be. The problem is most courtrooms aren't very large, and there are many cases that take place around the country where a lot of people would like to go and watch the proceedings, and only a limited number can go in. I mean, I was involved in a trial in March of 2016 in federal court in Hammond, and a lot of people came to the trial, but that particular courtroom, and that was the courtroom of the chief judge of the Northern District of Indiana, it probably seats maybe 40 people. So that's typical of a courtroom in the United States, state or federal. So it's very important that while people are able to come in and watch the trials in person, that the people should also be able to watch the trials by camera. They should be able to be at home on their computers or even in front of their television sets and watching the courts in progress. The courts are, first of all, the courts are funded by public money, by the taxpayers. The taxpayers pay for the courtroom, the operation of the courtroom, the facility of the courtroom, and the judges' salaries. So therefore, the public should be able to watch everything that's taking place in a courtroom, short of something that absolutely requires some type of privilege where certain things may not, have to come out, like national security issues or something like that. But the fact that many courts across the country choose not to televise the courtrooms is a cause for alarm. It's a red flag to the people of our country as to what is actually taking place and not taking place in the courtrooms. One good example of a court that decided to publicize in camera a trial, we all can remember the O.J. Simpson trial in California years ago. Now, a lot of people had never really knew what a trial was like until they publicized the O.J. Simpson trial, which was carried, over live over, many of the television networks and so forth, and it gave the public an opportunity to see what happens in a real trial. And there's a lot of other cases that, that people would be interested in watching as well, but the courts generally don't want the public to come in and see what's going on. And I think that's a big problem that we have in the country. We should be concerned about judges that don't want us, the public, to see what's happening. Now, I can give you a couple of examples. A couple of years ago or so, in Hammond, in federal court in Hammond, there was a major criminal trial taking place. It was a mayor of Lake Station, Indiana. His last name was Soderquist. He was tried for some type of, I believe it was embezzlement of funds, something having to do with the public's money, misuse of the funds. So he was prosecuted, and the judge in that case, now this was a jury trial, the judge in that case, his name was Rudy Lozano. He it was alleged that he fell asleep at the trial. Now, there's some debate on whether he actually was sleeping or not. There's no doubt that he was putting his head down for extended periods of time, and many people who were at the trial and the newspapers reported that he was actually sleeping during the trial. Now, the defendant in the case, Soderquist, took that case he appealed it to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. And I have to be honest, I thought to myself, as soon as I read the first article where the judge was actually sleeping during the criminal trial, I thought to myself, they handed him an appeal. I mean, they just handed him on a platter a reversal. But it went to the Seventh Circuit. The Seventh Circuit saw the evidence and hawed around with it and refused to reverse the conviction. So we have somebody in jail, and by no means am I trying to in any way protect this defendant, because anybody who knows me knows my position when it comes to public officials misusing public funds and so forth. But having said that, everybody in this country is entitled to a fair trial, and certainly a trial where the judge isn't sleeping during the trial. So the Seventh Circuit in the end said, well, we're not going to reverse it. We're going to take some steps here to make sure that in the future the judge isn't sleeping and so forth. This is something it's absolutely ridiculous.
It is.
This is something the public should, if the public would have seen that, the public would have been outraged to know that we have a judge, in this case, a federal judge, sleeping, making over $200,000 a year as a salary, a lifetime salary, I may add, even after retirement. And who knows what else is taking place across the country. But the Seventh Circuit, who gave the judge a pass and wouldn't reverse on the case, and came up with some kind of nonsense about, well, we're going to watch things in the future and so forth. So this very same circuit, Chief Judge Diane Wood, she is against cameras in the courtroom. And after seeing the ruling in the Soderquist trial, I can see where she's coming from now, because Chief Judge Wood doesn't want the public to know what's happening in the courtrooms. In fact, the Seventh Circuit is one of the, now there are federal rules where cameras aren't allowed in the courtroom, but those rules can be changed. Judges like Chief Judge Wood and other judges could encourage the Rules Committee to change those rules, but they won't do that. Judge Wood doesn't want cameras in the Seventh Circuit courtroom because there are serious problems that are taking case in the Seventh Circuit that the judges don't want people to know about. And for a specific example, Judge Richard A. Posner, who retired not too long ago from the Seventh Circuit, over an issue of pro se litigants, those are unrepresented litigants, being mistreated and not being treated fairly by the judges in the Seventh Circuit, actually retired from the bench because of that reason. Now, prior to that, Judge Posner had inquired and actually encouraged the Seventh Circuit to have cameras in the courtroom. And when he discussed that with Chief Judge Wood told Judge Posner, well, they can't afford it. She said, we can't afford that. Judge Posner said, you don't have to worry about that, because I, Judge Posner, will pay for it out of my own funds. I will pay for the courtroom, for the cameras in the courtroom, Judge Posner told her. And Chief Judge Diane Wood said no. Now, first it was, well, we can't afford it. Then when that was not an issue, she said, no, we're not going to do it, because she doesn't want people to know what's going on in the Seventh Circuit. I actually asked Chief Judge Wood to come on our show here and discuss this issue and some other issues. I sent her an email, invited her to come on the show, and I got a nonsense email back, an unsigned email from her staff, somebody from her staff that wouldn't identify himself, which I thought was inappropriate. These are public employees. Yeah. That email sent to me was paid for by public funds. Somebody on the taxpayer's dime sent that, but they won't identify themselves. So I asked Chief Judge Wood to identify who that person was who sent that email back to me. The person said, Chief Judge Wood is not available to come on the show. So I thought that was a really questionable response, because she said she was unavailable, but we hadn't set any date for it. We never even gave any proposed date. So that right there tells you it was a joke. The response was a joke. She just simply, basically, the bottom line is, she's a coward. She's afraid to come on this show and discuss this issue with you and I, because she does not want the public to know what's happening in the Seventh Circuit. She does not want to be confronted with the questions I have of her. She knows that several years ago, I had a case at an oral argument in the Seventh Circuit, and there was a judge there. He's still there. His name is Michael S. Caney, K-A-N-N-E. And he sat there. This was a civil rights case. And he sat there and just publicly criticized me because of my stance on standing up to the government. He was very upset. He asked very few questions about the actual case and took it upon himself to just blast me in the oral argument. And then he took it upon himself to write the ruling in the case for the 3-judge panel, which of course was against me and in favor of the government. And then later on, when I found out that Judge Caney was doing a favor for his wife, who was at the time a professor at St. Joseph's College in Rensselaer, where Judge Caney lives, that she asked Judge Caney, according to the information that I received, to do her co-worker a favor, who was a defendant in my case. And then Judge Caney accommodated her and helped her co-worker out, ruled in his favor. And he should have never been in the case because of that conflict of interest. But then when I filed papers with the Seventh Circuit after I found out about this, and I said that Judge Caney should have not been involved in the case because of his conflict, and he should have recused himself, which he didn't do. He instead chose to stay on the case and issue the ruling in the case. Then after I reported to the Seventh Circuit what Caney did, then he recused himself, but only after he wrote the ruling. These are the corrupt activities that are going on in the Seventh Circuit with judges like Michael Caney that the public should be aware of, and cameras in a courtroom would do a great deal to help the public see the corruption that's taking place with judges like Michael Caney and other judges across the country, I'm sure.
That's really astounding, Brian. I mean, your correspondence with Judge Wood and her staff, their responses, and the fact that, as you pointed out, we didn't even propose a date and they just said she's unavailable. It's very revealing of their obstructionist approach to basically everything. They just start from a place of having a decision, in this case that decision being no, and no matter what the circumstances, they're going to find a set of answers to suit that decision, rather than listening to what you have to say, pondering it, and then arriving at a conclusion. It's a very dangerous way, I should say, it's a very bad way for a judge to be, but it's also dangerous because a judge who is so prone to stick to their guns, irrespective of new information coming in. I mean, if you had said, well, we could speak to the judge next week or after whatever case she's working on or whatever, there's obviously a number of circumstances where we could have found a way to accommodate the judge, but they just came at us with no as the answer and did not move off of that no. So I have to commend you for what you're doing in confronting these judges like Michael Caney and Judge Wood and all these other judges. People can read all about Brian's basically incredible efforts to rail against corruption in the courts. They can get his book, Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case, and you can meet Brian in person and have the book signed this Saturday at the Barnes & Noble in Valparaiso, Indiana. So if you're anywhere nearby, I think it's very worthwhile to go and see Brian and get the book and read it. It's really important what we're trying to do as far as educating the public as to what their rights are. I should also add, Brian, you're not a lawyer. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. We're not attempting to give anybody any legal advice. We're just instructing people as to what their rights are, what the laws are, and pointing out things that we see as corrupt and not adhering to those laws.
Yes, absolutely. And Michael, or Jason, I'm sorry, I'm thinking about Caney here.
Yeah.
Jason, I'm sorry. Now, let me please tell the audience, my book isn't meant to make a lot of money for me or to get me famous or anything like that. My book has one purpose and one purpose only. I want the people to understand and to realize what's going on in the courts in our country, because it's very important. Because the courts affect people's everyday lives in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
In civil cases and in criminal cases. That's very important, and it affects everybody, whether you've had a court case or not. And the situations that I discuss in my book are all true fact-based situations that happen. I have a lot of evidence in there to back up everything that I say in the book, and I think if people will read the book, they will get an idea of exactly what's taking place and what needs to be changed. And you're right about what you said about Chief Judge Wood's handling of the email and just obviously afraid to come on the show and answer some questions that need to be answered. Judge Wood, Diane Wood, and many other judges across the country, they operate as if it's like a secret society. It's let's keep things within within ourselves with the judges. Whenever there's problems that come up that are out there in the public eye, let's not let the public really know what's happening. Let's kind of take care of it from within without the public's input. They treat the courts as if it's their personal domain.
Yeah.
It's like it's their kingdom. The courts are the kingdom of the people. The people pay for the courts. The people have every right to know what's happening in the courts, and it's very unfair for the judge. They could easily have cameras in the courtroom so we can see what's going on. Now, the fact that they don't want cameras in the courtroom is very telling. Judge Wood knows that if she comes on this show, I'm going to have some very serious questions for her as to what's happening in the Seventh Circuit. She knows that. That's why Judge Wood, does not want to come on this show. I, again, invite her through this show to come on here and answer some questions. All she's got to do is be honest and tell the truth. But it seems like she has a problem with that. She would rather conceal the activities that are taking place in that secret court there in the Seventh Circuit. And that's very sad and disheartening for that to have happened.
And that's, of course, that's the same court, as you said, that Judge Posner left, and you're very active with the Posner Center for Pro Se Justice. It's a good thing that you and I were connected. Of course, I met Judge Posner with Jared and Elizabeth Beck not long ago when I went to Chicago to interview him. And Brian, what kind of things are going on at the Posner Center of Justice for Pro Ses?
Well, a lot of different things. We're helping people all across the country. I mean, from coast to coast. They're calling and letting us know that they're having problems with judges in their cases who aren't giving their cases very much of a review at all. I mean, they're just basically dismissing cases without essentially even looking at the cases. And this is a problem across the country. So then we come in, we step in, and we try to get them some legal representation in some cases. In some other cases, we'll help them proceed pro se. That's where I come in great detail with helping people that are explaining their cases to me, and then I give them whatever information I can. As you said, I'm not a lawyer, but I've been involved with state and federal court cases, won a federal jury trial, so I know how the system works and how it operates, and therefore I'm able to help some people in that regard. So now also I should mention Judge Posner has been involved with a case. The individual, his name is Mr. Bond, B-O-N-D, who was in I believe out of the Fourth Circuit in Maryland, who got no justice from the Court of Appeals there. And he appealed the case because the judge in this case wouldn't allow him to amend his complaint. And the appeals court didn't want to explain. They ruled against him, but they didn't want to explain that ruling. And Judge Posner wasn't happy about that. And Judge Posner stepped in and became one of his advocates in the case, and filed a brief stating that the Court of Appeal should at least explain. He wasn't taking issue with the actual ruling against Mr. Wood, but he was taking issue with the fact that the appellate court wouldn't explain the ruling, and particularly to a pro se litigant, they should at least say why they ruled against them, for whatever reason that was. So, in the end, the appellate court said, "Too bad for you." And then Judge Posner now, there's a very highly recognized attorney in the United States, David Boies, B-O-I-S-E, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He's been involved. He was involved in the Gore Bush presidential arguments years back when they had the problem with the election and so forth. Yes, there he is, David Boies. And I believe he represented Mr. Gore in that case. So he's a very famous judge, irrespective of whatever the politics of it might be. He's one of the top lawyers in the country, and him and Judge Posner are going to be petitioning the United States Supreme Court for what's called a writ of certiorari for the Supreme Court to review Mr. Bond's case and set some guidelines as to what federal district court judges and appellate court judges must do, particularly in pro se cases, in explaining cases, which they're just not doing. People. One thing people should understand is everybody in our country is entitled to their day in court, whether you have a lawyer or not. Some people can't afford to have a lawyer for a lot of different reasons. So there's actually a law. It's a federal law. It's the Judiciary Act of 1789, which Congress put in place, making it very clear that people have a federal right to represent themselves in court. That's the Judiciary Act of 1789. But the judges across the country either don't know about that law or don't care about it, don't really want to enforce that law. And they're very hostile to pro se litigants. It happened to me. I went to trial in a federal case in U.S. District Court in Hammond with Chief Judge Philip Simon. We had a 5-day jury trial, and we had to have conversations before the trial about his reluctance, his disfavor of my representing myself. He didn't like it, and he let me know it, and he was insisting that I bring a lawyer in. He was actually even going to get me a lawyer, and I made it very clear that I was going to represent myself, and he didn't want to respect that right for me to do that. So I was able to win the trial. I won the trial. It was a 5-day jury trial on my own without a lawyer, despite what Simon was trying to do to me in the case. I often wonder what would have happened if I would have had a lawyer.
Yeah.
I guess I might have easily have lost, because the lawyer a lot of times doesn't want to bring things out that people want to have come out because of the politics behind things. And I never let the politics come into play. I called it as a...
And just to expand on that, Brian, when you say the politics of it, obviously the lawyers that appear before the judge, maybe they owe him a favor or they're looking for a favor down the road. I want something to happen on this case over here, so I'll make this thing go away over here. I mean, it could come down to something as simple as the judge wants this trial to wrap up before the end of this week because he's going on vacation and they don't really care about you. They just want to, sort of grease the wheels of justice and have things move along for whatever their personal reasons might be. But so many aspects of our government are designed so that we have checks and balances. And when judges have these lifetime appointments and can do all these behind-the-scene shenanigans and there is no check or balance on any of that, we're in real serious trouble. So having cameras in the courtroom would be one way to do that, to put all the judges on alert. It's like body cameras on the police. If they know they're being watched, perhaps they behave slightly differently than if they think no one will ever find out what they're doing. Now, in the case that you've just described, and you've spoken to us about it before, was it Judge Simon? Did you bring up this Judiciary Act of 1789 to Judge Simon?
I brought it up in court papers to him, and also in addition to the Judiciary Act of 1789, Judge Simon took exception with, we had an argument over a pleading issue, and so we went back and forth on it, and I had to remind Judge Simon that he was not following the Supreme Court's directive in a Supreme Court decision, Haynes versus Kerner, which is the leading Supreme Court case on pro se issues, requiring judges to give a liberal reading to pro se complaints. And I never played the pro se card in my case at all. But when he wanted to make an argument about that pleading issue, I reminded him about the Haynes versus Kerner case, and he got mad about it. Yeah. And in fact, he made a negative comment to me. He said, when I mentioned the Haynes versus Kerner case, he responded, and I quote, "Here we go." And I said to Judge Simon, "What do you mean, here we go?" And then he just wanted to let that go by the wayside, and then he continued on to the next thing. He didn't want to talk about it because he knew we were on the record. So I actually wrote a letter to Associate Justice Elena Kagan on the Supreme Court. I want people to know that whenever they have a problem with federal judges, every Supreme Court justice in the Supreme Court is assigned to a certain area, a circuit in the country. And so I wrote to, and they oversee the judge's conduct in that circuit. I'm in the Seventh Circuit, so Judge Kagan is in charge of the Seventh Circuit. So I wrote her a letter, and I told her about that. And so, I just felt that she should know about that. But see, if we don't report things, these judges they'll just go on their merry way and just keep doing it to other people. And I wanted him to understand that he was wrong, and he knows he was wrong, and that he should have respected my right to come in and vigorously defend myself at this trial, because I showed at the trial how that school corporation lied. These are public officials, and they lied at the trial. I mean, it was very helpful to me that they lied at the trial, but it was very disheartening to see their lies helped me win the trial. And Simon saw that. But judges have a tendency to protect the government agencies. They're basically government. Well, they're part of the government.
Right.
But so now the gravy train has to end. As you said here a little while ago about having cameras in the courtroom so the public knows what's going on. If it's okay, I'd like to quote what these judges are making for a salary that we're paying for. Every federal district court judge in the United States makes $199,000 a year. $199,000 a year. Appellate court judges in every circuit in the country, they make $211,200 a year. The associate justices on the Supreme Court make $244,000 a year.
Wow.
Now, these salaries go up from year to year. And I might add that I think a lot of people need to know that when a federal judge retires from the judiciary, whatever their last salary was, for example, this year, a judge who's making $199,000 a year, if he retires now this year, he will continue to make for the rest of his life $199,000 a year.
That's crazy.
As his retirement. It's absolutely ludicrous. And these people do not want us to know what's going on in the courtrooms. And on top of those salaries, they have the insurance and all of those things that go with it. So we should be actually paying attention to that as a country and demanding that we know what these judges are doing. I have serious questions as to, when you're making $200,000 a year, you should be on the job.
Yeah,
8
not
hours
sleeping.
Exactly, or playing golf or whatever they do. I often wonder what would have been going on that week if I would have resisted the pressure that Simon was put. He tried to get me to settle the case for $150,000 right before the trial, and I told him to jump in the lake. I wasn't going to do it. He didn't like it. And I often wonder what would have been happening during that trial week. Was that a week that he was to go out and play golf or what he was going to do? Who knows?
Right.
But and another problem that's happening that first let me add, when you walk by a courtroom, it's a concern that not many things are taking place. The courtroom doors are basically locked. I mean, occasionally you'll run into a courtroom where there's something going on. So I'm wondering, what are these judges doing? I do know this, that the federal judges across the country, there's a big problem with signing off on summary judgment motions. In other words, a plaintiff will come in, he'll sue a government agency or a corporation, and then they'll hire a bunch of lawyers like they did in my case, 5 lawyers in my case, and I didn't even have a lawyer. So they're all making all this big money against these litigants. And then at some point, they'll file a motion for summary judgment to dismiss the case, and the judges will routinely grant those summary judgment motions. That way, there's no trial. If they deny the summary judgment motion, there has to be a trial. But the judges, in fact, in an article in my case, it was pointed out after my case was done, that only 1% of the cases in the Northern District of Indiana ever make it to trial. 1 out of 100 cases actually make it to trial.
Wow.
With all of the lawsuits that are filed, you would think that for justice to take place, there should be a whole lot of trials going on, but there aren't. And the reason is very simple. Judges are giving the government and the corporations a pass against the people's cases. There's no trials going on. They don't want us to see what's going on when there is something going on. We have a big problem in the country. And
Brian,
that gravy
you're revealing,
train,
the gravy train's got to end, I agree. You're revealing so much powerful information. I certainly had no idea that the justices of the Supreme Court oversaw the activity of federal judges. I wonder if people in our viewing audience knew that, but this is so helpful. Is there a resource that people can go to, that maybe a website that tells them which Supreme Court justice would oversee a federal judge in which district?
yes, absolutely. In fact, I had to resort to that website because I had to find out who the judge was in particular in charge of the Seventh Circuit. So you can just Google in Supreme Court but make sure you put United States Supreme Court because you'll get all the state Supreme Courts. Just Google in United States Supreme Court, and their website will come up. And then there'll be a biography of each judge in there, and there'll be information in there that will tell the public which justice, I should say, is in charge of the particular circuits around the country. So if you have a case going, and this is something that I deal with a lot of the pro se's, I tell them when they call me, I tell them that they should actually report that judge's conduct to that particular justice on the United States Supreme Court. Some of them are hesitant to do so because they're afraid, but I do tell them about it. Now, they don't know about it, so I try to educate them on it and let them know that that's something they can do, because let's face it, if the district court judges and the appellate judges know they can do whatever they're doing without being watched, without being scrutinized, they're just going to continue on.
Yeah.
But if they get a call from a justice of the Supreme Court and asks them, hey, what's going on here? I got an inquiry about an allegation that you're abusing this litigant's rights and so forth. If those judges know that they're being scrutinized like that, then we could have some positive change. But people have to step up and do these things. So please, if you have a case in a federal court and the judge is mistreating you in any way, report it to, and there's a good list there that Jason's putting up there right now, and it's got the justice's name and also the states underneath it. So if you happen to be in one of those particular states, contact that justice and report what's taking place, and it might be helpful to you.
Wow. That's an incredibly powerful resource, Brian, and this is absolutely right up there with the type of things that I hope that the Counterlawfare report will be able to do to educate people as to what their rights are and what they can do when they're faced with this kind of mistreatment. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the Bundy family and the trial that went on in Nevada. Were you familiar with that case, Brian?
Yes, absolutely. I remember the Bundy case in Nevada.
Mm-hmm. Earlier today, I had Ryan Bundy on the show, and Ryan, of course, is running for governor of Nevada. Their case was thrown out due to gross prosecutorial misconduct. Ryan and his father and several of his relatives and associates were thrown in jail prior to conviction for any charge. Ryan spent a good deal of his time in solitary confinement in separate conversations. The men described to me humiliating sexual assaults that they suffered, in some cases at the hands of the guards, and really torture in prison. So, I mean, it's certainly not what you would expect in the United States of America. And it was just a gross abuse of the legal system. The most shocking aspect of it, despite the fact that the case was ultimately thrown out due to prosecutorial misconduct, withholding exculpatory evidence, all of the things that you and I have spoken about, it was thrown out with prejudice, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's supposed to mean that it can't be brought up again, it can't be appealed, right?
That is exactly correct.
But Attorney General Jeff Sessions is appealing it now.
Well, I don't know what his grounds are. With prejudice means that it's done. The case is over. So sometimes prosecutors will want to get creative with things and throw something out there and hope that something will stick, knowing that there are judges out there that may bite on it. Now, in the Bundy case, he obviously had a pretty good judge there that which some people just aren't fortunate enough. A lot of people will get these government type judges that don't want to hear anything about prosecutorial misconduct and so forth. But his particular judge was actually very good because he said, look, we're here for justice. This was wrong. I'm throwing the case out. And the judge did so with prejudice. Attorney General Sessions really is just a disservice. That it's actually a lack of respect for the rule of law, because the law states that when it's with prejudice, the case is over. That's the reason for it. But prosecutors get creative. They want to throw things out, and then sometimes judges will actually bite on it. That's the problem that we have with our system. It would be a great system if we had prosecutors and judges that actually followed the rules and the laws. The system is great. What's not so great is the people that are in the system that are coming out of, judges are, they were lawyers. A lot of them were in private practice, defending corporations, prosecutors, and so forth. And then when they get on the bench, they seem to forget that they're there to actually effect justice for everybody and not just corporations and government agencies. So that's my guess is that's what Sessions is biting on right now. He's thinking, well, if I can get this into a court where I may get some favorable judges and they can get a little creative, and judges get very creative. Trust me when I say that. I read a lot of rules and they get very creative. They basically close their eyes to the facts, close their eyes to the law, and then whatever their predetermined notion is of the case, that's what they do. It's just ridiculous what's going on.
It is.
But the Bundy case showed that there are some good judges out there, rare but few, but there are some.
Sure.
And I'm happy to see that he was able to get justice in this case, because no matter what the charge is, no matter what the facts are, you're entitled to a fair trial.
Yeah.
And being in the state of Indiana, I learned that that's not a very easy thing to have happen in Indiana, because I had several of them. I mean, I dealt with judges. I dealt with a judge in LaPorte County, Indiana. His name was Paul Baldoni. I wish we would have had courtroom cameras in the courtroom during that trial, when he was rolling his eyes around and doing everything he could do to help get me convicted in the case. And I wrote it. It's all in the book, so I'm sure he's not going to be too happy when I put the facts in the book. But this is a problem that we're having in the country. Luckily, Bundy.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, the book, of course, is Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case. I love the number of stories that are coming out in our interviews as far as what you cover in the book. People should definitely pick up that book and read all about Brian's unbelievable revelations of just the gross misconduct of judges and prosecutors all over the country. Just touching on Ryan Bundy again for a moment, I don't know necessarily that it was so much a matter of the judge being good. It might have been more of a matter of so much public attention went to this trial that the judge would have been basically, I mean, she was left with virtually no choice but to serve justice. It was so egregious what was going on, the withholding of evidence, sticking these guys in jail for 2 years. None of them had ever done any violent crimes. There were claims of an armed standoff, but of course, they did not have arms. The Bundy family and the guys that they stuck in the jail were not the armed individuals, and nobody fired any guns. So I'm just shocked that Jeff Sessions gets involved in this. And we see so much evidence in other cases, like the financial crimes of the Clinton Foundation, that he's done nothing about. So we really see the unbelievable bias in these types of cases in federal court. And these guys, we also should in the future, Brian, do an episode on for-profit prisons, because of course the Bundys were stuck in a facility over there in Pahrump, Nevada, where CoreCivic, the company that was formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America, which has our former Vice President Dick Cheney sitting on their board, CoreCivic owns the facility that the Bundys were locked in, and of course state and local governments and even federal governments are paying these companies money based on the number of inmates they have. So obviously there's a financial motivation to have more people in this jail, and we've heard of cases where there have been judges who received bribes to throw people in jail, and certainly when they select those people from the financially less capable segments of our population, they don't have the resources to bring in lawyers and fight these kinds of things. So it's important that people know what their rights are in terms of pro se representation and the ability to contact Supreme Court justices, maybe even just a letter from a citizen to a Supreme Court judge about a particular federal proceeding could have an impact. And hopefully someone watching our program right now will have learned that.
Yeah, first of all, Jason, you raise a great point about, particularly in the Bundy case, with the news media, when you said that, well, perhaps maybe it wasn't so much that the judge was so great as it was with the publicity that surrounded the case. That's a great point. And it's something that I talk about with the pro ses that contact me. I tell them, well, you know what, you're not going to get much luck. You know, you file a complaint, the judge is going to look at the other judge, review the complaint, and give them a pass and not do anything. But you need to report. You need to let the newspaper, the news media, know about these things as well, because the news media, when it puts, that's the one thing that does affect judges. They don't want to see their name out there in the news, and that's something that that should be happening more these days. But I have to tell you, I have to be honest. I've been in touch with newspapers, and there's a reluctance these days. There didn't used to be so much, but there's been a lot of reluctance with newspapers these days to actually report on when you get into judges taking money, such as with what you just brought up about the prisons and so forth. They're very reluctant, especially if you're talking about local judges. So I wish the newspapers would step up to the plate a little bit better than what they do, because I do know, especially in Indiana here, the newspapers are very conservative and they're reluctant to do that. But it's a great point. If the judges knew that the publicity was going to be out there, they may think twice about doing what they're doing. And another thing, when you talked about the money that they're receiving from and first of all, I agree. I think that would be a great show, actually, because the justice system is not supposed to be about making a profit. It's supposed to actually be about justice.
Right.
The word that's used is justice. It isn't the profit system. It's not making the money system. It's justice. But unfortunately, we have people, influential people, including judges, that make money off of these things. So let's put all these private prisons out there. Let's let private companies come in, just as you mentioned with Dick Cheney. And first of all, let me make one point here. I've got a few messages on Twitter and Facebook about people will say, well, they'll point to one party or the other party and so forth. And, honestly, it goes on with both parties.
Yeah.
Let's put that to rest right now. So I tried to be polite in my responses back, but this is both parties, actually. Nobody gets a pass on this.
Right.
And actually, this is one reason, again. Now, there are certain ways they're able to evade the rules, so to speak, and receive money and avoid conflict of interest. There's some narrow rules involved there. There's some exceptions where they're able to do that, but they shouldn't be receiving a dime. If it's got anything to do with prisons and they're involved, whether they're directly involved with a case or not, it just looks bad. There's an appearance of impropriety with it.
Right.
That's why it's very important. I believe that all judges, state and federal judges, should be required to take a polygraph test. I mean, let's face it. People, yes, they're not allowed in court, but we're not talking about a proceeding in court. We're talking about, do we have an honest judge or not? Very simple. It's a very basic question. He's a public official, paid by the taxpayers. We have a right to know if he's honest. We have a right to know if that particular judge has met with opposing attorneys, with insurance companies, and had any discussions about money, has received any money. That's why we should have polygraph tests. there should be no judge in the country that should be opposed to taking a polygraph test.
Right.
If you're opposed to taking a polygraph test, well, then your integrity is in question right then and there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I
And
think
as you say, it's not necessarily a matter of putting the judge through any sort of official procedure, but all of these steps that you're describing would go towards creating a situation that is the opposite of this current situation where the judges feel complacent and entitled to do whatever they want. They feel as if they're operating within a domain that they control, and that they are above the law. Even the judges need to operate within the context of the law. We saw in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, that judge was given a life sentence for this Kids for Cash scheme where minority young adults and teenage, I guess mostly boys, as I recall, were sent to prison. There was one story, I think, where the mother, I think the kid was 16, and it was some real minor thing. He got sent to juvenile detention, and then something happened there that caused him to go to prison, and then he was killed or committed suicide or something like that. So it's a real serious matter. These judges, I mean, how much money could this guy possibly be receiving? But I think the life sentence is well deserved. And that will hopefully send a message to other judges that you're not above the law. This is what I'd like us to do at this show, Brian, is, if the news media won't cover these cases of scandalous behavior, if they won't take testimony and facts and evidence from you about the wrongdoing of federal judges or local and state judges, then we'll publicize it here. And hopefully, as the audience for the Counterlawfare report grows, we can have some sort of impact on this. That's my hope. So people should definitely be sharing our broadcasts. These broadcasts are being made available on YouTube, on Periscope, on Facebook, on Twitch, on VK.com. So even people in Russia can be watching our broadcasts, Brian, and they can share them all over the world.
Jason, I'm going to tell you, I've been looking at the comments after the shows. We've been receiving a lot of good comments, some questions that you and I have both been answering to the audience. So I think we're having an impact. I can already see that happening, and I think it's going to grow as we grow along here, actually.
Yeah.
But the people have been, the comments have been very good. So we know people are watching. And so I agree with you on every point.
Brian, maybe we should take the time in the last 10 minutes here to actually answer some of these comments. Were there any that were sticking out in your mind from last week? Or it's always a risk to go to the live comments because there's a lot of people that tend to try to inject some nonsense in there. But what's a comment that sticks out in your mind as a good question? I love what you brought up today about contacting the Supreme Court justices. You've been in touch, of course, with another frequent guest, Michael Barden, and we spoke last week about how his criminal case was being interfered with. It's really had a major impact on Michael's, I would say, overall mental well-being. He's doing well, but that threw him off balance, which I think was the intent of the person who did it. Have there been any new developments with that yet?
I believe I'm going to hear from Michael tonight, as a matter of fact. I think he's going to be contacting his lawyer to discuss the plea deal in his case that I believe he wants to actually withdraw because of all of the recent developments that have taken place and all the pressure that he's been under, and he has a right to withdraw it. So as far as I know, I think he's going to contact his lawyer tonight to discuss this with him, and hopefully he'll be able to convince his lawyer to withdraw that plea and demand that those body cam evidence comes forward in the case before he moves on with any other plea negotiations in this case. So that's a positive thing that has happened for what we've done here. Michael has realized that he's been underrepresented in his case, and that now he's demanding that the money that he's paid, that he actually gets something back in return from his lawyer, to the effect that his lawyer will actually demand, under the rules in Arizona, that those body cam videos be produced in the case, and that possibly Michael can be exonerated of the whole charge. Actually, there was a lot of comments when you asked me about things that stuck out. There was a lot of comments about people saying on there to Michael, don't plead guilty to something that you're not guilty of, make them prove the case against you and make them bring the body cams out. Those were there were substantial comments about that.
Actually, Michael's with us right now in the live chat. I'm pleased to see him here. And he's encouraging people to watch Crowdsource the Truth. Thank you, Michael. Well, it's interesting, Brian. So the rules that you're talking about, these are Bar Association rules, or these are the laws? His defense attorney, or rather I should say the prosecutor in the case, is required specifically to provide evidence that would contribute to disproving the guilt. Isn't that correct?
Yes, it's a combination of Bar Association rules, American Bar Association, and then there are criminal rules, Arizona rules. In particular, there's a criminal Arizona rule that gives Michael the right to withdraw the guilty plea based on pressure tactics that have taken place against him. And also, the Bar Association in Arizona requires the prosecutors in Arizona to disclose exculpatory evidence. That's the Arizona rules where Michael's at. So it's a combination of the Bar Association and also the state rules and the criminal rules, all in Arizona, which favor Michael, actually,
right,
if his lawyer would step up to the plate and do his job.
Now, am I understanding you correctly that if Michael is under pressure or duress at the time that he accepts the plea deal, that actually helps him exercise his right to overturn that plea acceptance? So this irresponsible and reckless individual who took it upon himself to contact Michael's lawyer and point out that Michael was discussing the case on YouTube, that person has actually now helped Michael in some respect. Is that correct?
Yes, because that person actually gave Michael a verifiable basis to go in. See, first of all, a judge, people have to understand, a judge does not have to, he can accept the guilty plea if he wants, or he can reject it. And he doesn't have to necessarily accept. If Michael comes in now and says, I want to withdraw, the judge doesn't necessarily have to do that unless he's convinced that there's a bona fide reason that Michael was under pressure. So when this person did that and put this letter to Michael's lawyer, and then it made Michael think about what's going on in the background with people out there in other states, in another state, contacting my lawyer who's an officer of the court. What's going on here? Why is it so important for me to have a conviction here for something that he says he didn't do? And I believe him, actually, and I believe the prosecutor believes him, but just wants that conviction on their belt, that notch on their belt, because they don't want to give the body cams to him. So yes, the answer to your question is, when that person wrote that letter and interfered with those criminal court proceedings in Michael's case, that person actually did Michael a favor. Now it's up to the judge to do the right thing and represent Michael and bring that to the judge, bring that letter to the judge's attention, and then ask the judge to withdraw that plea, that guilty plea, and let justice take its course. But Michael should actually be thanking that person out of state. I believe it was from California.
Yeah.
Who wrote to his lawyer regarding the criminal proceeding that he's got nothing to do with. He did Michael a big favor. Michael should be thanking him, actually.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up for our topic today, Brian, what, if anything, can people do to move forward this idea of making it the rule that cameras should exist in courtrooms? I mean, certainly at some point in the course of time, there were technological barriers, the cost, etc. But at this point, I think everybody knows, even the cheapest $100 cell phone that you buy has a camera in it. If the statewide or the federal court system decided it was going to purchase thousands and thousands of cameras, the per camera cost and the overall cost would be marginal compared to some of the things that the government wastes money on. And I do believe it's everyone's right to observe these public proceedings, and it would help, I think, to hold everyone accountable, just as police body cameras need to be on and recording while the police are conducting their police duties, so that the police themselves are protected from false testimony, and those being accused of crime can, we have video footage to evaluate what actually happened. It's obviously a very strong bit of evidence if the police do not have or refuse to bring forward evidence that would support their claims, and not having that would seem to demonstrate Michael's innocence. But you shared with me this article from Reporters Committee, rcfp.org, about cameras in the courtroom, and these could be streaming video cameras where people could go to the court's website, and even maybe from Pacer or any of these publicly available tools, observe what's going on in the court.
Yeah, well, what people can do that would be very effective is flood the judges, the rules committee people in the state court system, in the federal court system, their state legislatures, their federal legislators. Flood them with letters and emails, and let those people know that the people demand the cameras in the courtroom. I mean, every chief judge of every district should receive letters from the people where the people are telling that chief judge, we the people want cameras in the courtroom. Every judge in the country, state and federal, should receive letters should be flooded with letters from people and emails and telephone calls. And the legislators should be flooded. These are constituents that should be telling their legislators, we want you to contact the courts and let the courts know that we want cameras in the courtroom. Those are ways that we could get this done. As you said about the publicity, when we talked about the Bundy case, if there was publicity out there, if the judges knew and the powers that be knew that the people overwhelmingly are flooding the courts and the rules committee people and the judges requesting cameras in the courtroom, there could be a change.
Yeah.
What they respond to, they'll blow people off. If they get a couple letters here or there, they just blow them off. But if they get a ton of letters, it's a different story. And that's what the people do. We have the power to do that if we would exercise that power.
Absolutely. So hopefully we can effect a change in that regard. Tomorrow is Election Day, so people should get out and vote for their representatives, and then maybe if the person you vote for gets in, you could send them a letter and demand that they make some kind of effort to get cameras in the courtrooms. And if anyone has a case that they are defending, or if they're a plaintiff in a case and they're pro se, they can go to justice-for-pro-ses, Justice for Pro Ses, with dashes in between each word, .org. Or you could just Google Posner Center of Justice for Pro Ses. Brian is very active there in helping people to understand their rights and to get justice in cases even if they can't afford a lawyer, and I think that's very important. You can also purchase Brian's book, Motion for Justice, I Rest My Case, and you can buy it from Amazon.com or BarnesandNoble.com. If you happen to be in the Valparaiso area this weekend, go see Brian at the Barnes & Noble in Valparaiso, Indiana. He's going to be signing the books, and it's a good opportunity to meet him. He's a fantastic guy, I can tell you from my interactions with him. Couldn't find a nicer guy with more knowledge about our rights. And Brian, I want to thank you for joining me tonight. It's been a very informative session, as always. Anything you'd like to say in closing?
No, it's my pleasure, Jason. I really enjoy coming on here, and I think that what we're doing is a great thing. It's a public service, and that's why we're here. And I just really hope that people are enjoying what we're doing. And don't hesitate to write your comments down. We're certainly looking at them and reading them and responding to them, because what we're doing is a very important thing here. So I thank you for the opportunity for us to be able to do that on the show here. It's very important.
It's my honor and pleasure to be here with you, Brian, and I hope people will stick around. In just 1 hour, we're going to be doing a very special episode. Michael Moore of True Pundit will be joining me along with Larry Klayman of FreedomWatchUSA.org. This is round 2 in the Mueller FOIA dump. We're going to be releasing a ton of emails from Robert Mueller's special counsel's office, communications between the special counsel's office and various members of the mainstream press, some conspicuous omissions from this second round of releases, and we're beginning to get a picture of what's going on between the press and Robert Mueller's office. So Brian, I hope you can tune in to watch that, and hope everybody else can tune in as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Brian, thank you for joining me. I'll see everybody in just under an hour.